Welcome to our Sunday morning worship with the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of York. I'm Carol Stowell, and I will be helping to lead our service. I have a long history with this place, and this week is a special week because it's the 26th anniversary of my marriage. My husband and I were the first couple to meet here and get married here. And yes, I actually bought him in the church auction 28 years ago. Yes, it was the best purchase I ever made. and I bought his sailing lessons, actually. And when I called him in February and said, "Hi, I'm the one that bought your sailing lessons," he said, "Oh, okay, well, I have a good book. Oh, we'll bring it over sometime." And the next day I find the book in the door and I think, oh, this guy's clueless. So then I called him up and I said, "Would you like to go out sometime?" And here we are. So our congregational mission is one of spiritual transformation, of work for a more just and equitable world, and of education and engagement for people of all ages. We welcome you here, whether it's your first time with us or you've been with us here for weeks, months, or years. We welcome you in person and we welcome you online. We now light the chalice, the symbol of our living faith. We kindle a flame of power, illuminating the holy in each of our faces. We recognize in the flame a passionate commitment to our shared faith. We are held and carried from day to day, week to week, in the shining of the light. This flame is mine, as well as each of yours. We are brought together on this day, called to growth, to expansion, within its glow. What does your heart know while beholding this holy fire? Do you remember your first day of school? Yeah. Moms and dads and grandparents, do you remember your first day of school? Well, I'm old and I remember my first day of school. It's like a really big deal, right? You don't know what to expect. You don't know what your teacher's going to be like. You don't know if you're going to like him or her. You don't know things like what are the rules going to be? Where's the bathroom? Are you going to get homework? Yes.
I do because I go to the same school.
Okay, but maybe the very first time you went there, it was all new. Yes. If you keep going back, then it's not so scary. But in the very, very first day, and then the teacher explains what the rules are, and it doesn't seem quite so scary because now you sort of know what to expect. But then you go out on the playground and the teachers aren't right there, and your friends, well, I remember my best friend was Debbie Holt, and we had this really fun playground. It had like different bars were different colors. And so we made this tag game on the bars. And like the red one was considered fire, and you weren't allowed to touch that. And then we had other rules about other bars. Well, then other kids wanted to come and play with us. Well, we weren't sure, but then Dave Zanke came. Dave Zanke, he was my and I said, well, okay, you can play. And then he had like some different ideas, and his friends had some different ideas. And before we knew it, we were starting to argue about what were going to be the rules on the jungle gym. But we compromised. We came up with some rules because we really wanted to play together. I mean, it's just a lot more fun when you're playing a game with other people. You don't want to play by yourself. It's sort of boring. So we compromised. And that's a kind of covenant. We were covenanting. It's not a word that you hear a lot, but you mostly hear it here in church. Well, the same thing happened with our congregation 50 years ago. We're called the Unitarian Universalists, but we weren't 50 years ago. There was this group of churches, they were called Unitarians, and there were a bunch of them. And there were a group of Universalists, and there were a bunch of them. And they were all over the country, and they believed a lot of the same things, but not all the same things. And so they started talking to each other because they said, maybe we would do better and be stronger if we come together. And so they came together, and some of the leaders met, and they talked, and they argued, and they discussed. And I see Ellen, because she probably was involved maybe a little bit in that, because she's been a Unitarian Universalist for a long time. And so they talked about, well, what are the rules going to be if we come together? And so they compromised. And they came up with a set of rules. They covenanted with each other. And they had 6 principles. And then in 1978, later, they got together again and they made a 7th principle. And this was the covenant of the Unitarian Universalists. And now I'm going to ask Reverend Jen to help us. We're going to read, and we want all of you, all sizes who can read, to read what are the 7 principles of the Unitarian Universalists. Number 1, each person is important. Okay? Number 2, be kind in all you do. Number 3, we're free to learn together. Number 4, we search for what is true. Number 5, all people need a voice. Number 6, build a fair and peaceful world. And finally, 7, we care for Earth's lifeboat. That is our covenant. Those are our principles. And this year, there's going to be a gathering of all of the Unitarian Universalists, and it's going to be in Pennsylvania. It's going to be in Pittsburgh. I'm going. I'm really excited. Anybody can go. And we're going to be talking about those principles, and we're going to be making some changes and voting on some changes. And I'm sure there'll be some disagreements, and there'll be some compromises. But then we will covenant with each other, and we will work together to create our future as Unitarians and Universalists. There we go. Thanks for listening. Now we invite you to, we'll sing you out to your classes. Thank you. Thank you.
With
reading this morning is an excerpt from The Missing Remnant by Sophia Betancourt. The journey towards redemption is about truth-telling, lamentation, and owning our wrongs, while at the same time claiming the profound possibility that calls us forward. We are the inheritors of the legacies of white supremacy, but also of an unimaginable grace, of certainty in the possibilities of redemption, of weaving a tapestry of leadership that may yet not be, but we long for, but is called to be the richest expression of humanity's sacredness. We believe in human capacity great enough, a God loving enough, values strong enough, communities dedicated enough, and leaders humble enough to move us towards redemption. And I think we know that redemption is a shared ministry that means everyone, that elevates all, that seeks out the suffering, the neglected places of the world and breathes the holy back into them. Redemption is a professional religious leadership that is humble, that apologizes, and that limits its own power to move us towards a greater truth. Moving in that direction means trying even when we don't know how it will ever come to pass. Trying because the struggle itself is holy. It means celebrating the successes that do in fact exist among us, elevating them and putting them to the service of creating an even greater success. And at the same time, it is modeling that the reality of our failings is not more powerful than the inherent goodness that we teach. We are left asking ourselves, what will we risk for this grace? The thing is, I believe in our callings. Yes, many of us are called to professional religious leadership. We agree to be there in the difficult moments and in the successes and the celebrations. And we promise to wrestle and show up even when our hearts are breaking. But we also promise to understand that every member and friend of a Unitarian Universalist community is also there by calling. We are called collectively to this great experiment in communal salvation, whether we arrived at this faith by birth or by choice. Our everyday expression of our values in the world does matter.
Late in January of this year, I was on retreat with other ministers from our local chapter of the UU Ministers Association, and we can be pretty busy people, so it was really lovely that many of us could make time to learn and to reflect together. Now, on Saturday morning, I arrived a little bit late to the business meeting we were having because I had actually been teaching one of our membership classes on Zoom. I settled into my seat next to the whiteboard, and during the conversation, people kept making a joke that I clearly was not in on. They kept using the word JETPIG and laughing. And finally, I said, hold on. What the heck is a JETPIG? And why are you talking about it so much? And they pointed to the whiteboard next to me where they had written several things, but one of them were the list of Unitarian Universalist values as spelled out in the then just released report of the Article 2 Study Commission. The list spelled out justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, generosity. And off to the right of this list of words was the word love, written in all capitals and circled. And we got very excited about this list and about that mnemonic device to help me remember them, because you may have heard I'm the UU minister who cannot always remember the 7 principles in order. Yeah. So, and it's not just because I liked that visual. Is a JETPIG a pig shaped like a jet? Is it a pig wearing a jetpack? We don't know. I didn't just like to think about that visual and think of that JETPIG in orbit around a planet called love, but it was fun because this was a big deal. This was the culmination of years of work on behalf of the Article 2 Study Commission and thousands of Unitarian Universalists who sat for interviews and filled out response questionnaires, all serving the radical end of possibly rewriting that part of our bylaws that are at the heart of our faith, that contain these 7 principles that Carol has illustrated for us today. So today is the 5th and final part of my 5-part sermon series on the work of the Article 2 Study Commission, all leading up to the initial vote on the proposed revisions with possible amendments. Amendments are still possible this June at the annual General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association of Congregations, this year held in Pittsburgh, close by. And if it's such a big deal, if it's so important, why were a bunch of ministers laughing about it? I can only answer for myself, but it felt exciting to me. There was energy around it. It really felt like an invitation to engage with this important work at a really human level. What would it mean in the day-to-day life of Unitarian Universalists if we updated the language of Article 2 of our bylaws, which is where the current language contains our 7 principles and 6 sources? So throughout the course of this series, we've talked about what it means to co-create our living tradition together. It's an audacious idea for a faith tradition to re-examine the ideas that are at its very center. But we've also talked about our shared values, both how we define them and how we live them in the world. And that was the second part of the sermon series, and by then we had an initial first draft of the Commission's report. In the third part of the series, we talked about being and belonging, about what it means to us when we call ourselves Unitarian Universalists, and what it means to be a part of a faith community within this tradition. And in the fourth part of the series, not long after that retreat in January, we talked about why it's important to do deep self-examination within that faith community and not just on one's own. The journey to truth is too long and too challenging for us to undertake alone. We must listen to our inner teacher, but we must also find a community of trust where we can invite discourse on how we are to navigate that which we are called to do. It is this valuable and challenging work of community that brings us to today's reading. Thank you, Carol, for that beautiful reading. This particular reading is part of a sermon delivered at General Assembly in Kansas City, Missouri in June of 2018 by the Reverend Dr. Sophia Betancourt. At the time, Reverend Betancourt was concluding a 1-year shared interim presidency of the UUA that had come at a time of turmoil in our association. And as a matter of fact, this year at Pittsburgh, we will elect Dr. Betancourt, Reverend Dr. Betancourt, she is running unopposed for the new presidency of the UUA. Her shared leadership during the time of turmoil and change can serve as a model to us as we consider this proposed change to how we talk about the heart of our faith tradition. So we're going to return to this part of our reading. The thing is, I believe in our callings. Yes, many of us are called to professional religious leadership. We agree to be there in difficult moments and in the successes and celebrations, and we promise to wrestle and show up even as our hearts are breaking. But we also promise to understand that every member and friend of a Unitarian Universalist community is also there by calling. We are called collectively to this great experiment in communal salvation, whether we arrived in this faith by birth or by choice. Our everyday expression of our values in the world matters. Our everyday expression of our values in the world matters. In Unitarian Universalism, we operate under the system of congregational polity, which essentially means that each congregation is self-governing, that we have no presbyters or council of elders or bishopric presiding over the faith life of our communities. This in itself is an audacious experiment. And then for us to openly acknowledge in our bylaws that those same bylaws themselves need to be returned to on a regular basis, that it is a deep act of faith to question our own tradition, to ask ourselves hard questions over and over again, that truly is a great experiment in communal salvation. It's an experiment, but it is not purely theoretical. Earlier this month, our current president, the Reverend Susan Frederick Gray, issued an impassioned statement responding to the increased legislative attacks on trans and non-binary kids in the entire LGBTQIA+ community across the country. The statement reads in part, "As progressive people of faith, we affirm and remain in solidarity with trans and non-binary people because this is a fight for everyone's humanity. We must actively work to create a society where trans children can be free to be who they are and fully live into their identity. And we must strengthen our partnerships across faith communities and with grassroots partners to build networks of safety and care while mobilizing for change that supports a more just, equal, and loving society." Justice, equal, love. These are all our values. We hear these words again and again. We are called to this kind of support both pastorally and personally. We are called to consider the values at the heart of our faith and to act on them in those ways available to us. We cannot all do all of the things. This framework gives us a way to find those things where we do feel called to pray, to think, to act. Our newly proposed language puts love at the center, not because it's easy. Love is one of those words that means many things to many people. But at the heart of the other 6 values, justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity, we know that love calls us to be in communities of faith and of action with one another, even when there is risk. Uzunite. We agree to be there in the difficult moments and in the successes and celebrations, and we promise to wrestle and show up even as our hearts are breaking. To stay in this work even when it's hard, this is a thing I feel we need to remind ourselves again and again, but I also wanted to start with a story of laughter and of joy because those celebrations are part of it too. It's like the rules we define together on the playground when we're about to play, like Carol introduced during our game. We get to have fun with this too. If we don't, we'll never make it. Joy is an act of resistance, as the poet Toy Derricott reminds us, and it is my hope that you feel a sense of curiosity and even joy about what the revised Article 2 is calling us to. And so I'm going to share with you right now that specific part of the proposed revision where these values are articulated. There is more to it. We have a single color copy out at the welcome desk if you want to take a look at this report of the Article 2 Commission. We'll have some more copies for takeaway in the future, and we're also going to have a web page where you can read my 5-part sermon series if you are so moved, and also take a look at the report and some of the actions that we're called to do around it. I want you to spend some time with them yourself, but I do want to make sure that we listen to this language together. So the proposed revision. Section C-2.2, Values and Covenant. As Unitarian Universalists, we covenant congregation to congregation and through our association to support and assist one another in our ministries. We draw from our heritages of freedom, reason, hope, and courage, building on the foundation of love. Love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. Inseparable from one another, these shared values are interdependence. We honor the interdependent web of all existence. We covenant to cherish Earth and all beings by creating and nurturing relationships of care and respect. With humility and reverence, we acknowledge our place in the great web of life, and we work to repair harm and damaged relationships. Pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. Justice. We work to be a diverse, multicultural, beloved community where all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of inclusive democratic processes to make decisions. Transformation. We adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, never complete and never perfect. Generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. And equity. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent dignity and worthiness. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible and inclusive communities. So the report itself features a lovely graphic that suggests a flower with love and our flaming chalice symbol at the center, and the other 6 values arrayed like petals around it. It's really lovely. And whether that image resonates with you, or you, like me, now that I've put it in your heads, keep thinking of a little JETPIG circling a planet called love, I want you to remember most that you are called to this faith. You are called to examine and question and engage with open-heartedness in this hurting world. Or to return to the words from our chalice lighting from dedicated religious professional and candidate for ministry, Adrian Graham, also a friend of mine. Hey, Adrian. We are held and carried from day to day, week to week, in the shining of the light. This flame is mine as well as yours. We are brought together on this day, called to growth, to expansion within its glow. What does your heart know while beholding this holy fire? What does your heart know while beholding this holy fire? What is the work ahead? How can we engage that work with joy? We will only answer these questions together. I am glad to have each of you as companions on this journey. May our way be blessed, and may we continue to grow and explore with love ever at the center. So may it be.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know it, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. It will be hard, we know, and the road
please join us in extinguishing our chalice and our home chalices if you have lit them with these words. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
We carry this and so much more in our hearts each week and every day as we go out into the world and say, how are my values calling me to be in this world? And it can be hard, but this should be a place of anchor and of refuge and of sanctuary for you. May we be a sanctuary to each other. So may it be.